back to our regularly scheduled Shield Hero Cut content, where this time we'll cover episodes 15 and 16, and even a special side story dedicated to Fitoria. A lot of what was skipped this time was some more action than what we were shown in the anime, more specifically involving both the fight with the noble and the fight between Fitoria and the dinosaur dragon. But we'll resume from episode 15, where Raphtalia is about to have her fateful reunion with the fat noble. If you remember, this episode was filled with all types of flashbacks from Raphtalia's past, but because we already covered all of them as one consecutive storyline in the last episode, we'll focus on only the present this time. So join me once again as we go through together what the anime skipped from both the light novel and the manga in what is now the 10th installment of Shield Hero Cut content. But first, I'm sure you can already tell by the epic cinematic that Raid Shadow Legends is back once again to sponsor this video. Now, in the unlikely case that you haven't already been exposed to this, Raid is a brand new collection RPG game. It has an amazing storyline, awesome 3D graphics, giant boss fights, and more than 400 champions for you to collect and personally customize. And the great thing about it is that it'll remind you of those classic RPG and strategy games, all while giving you that experience through your phone, with no expense at the visual aesthetic either. I mean, look at the crazy detail on some of these champions. Oh, and it's also free to play with an almost perfect rating from over 170,000 people in the Play Store, so that's gotta count for something. Anyway, the game is growing super fast, and there's even going to be a huge update this month, which will be loads of fun for new players. So go ahead and use the link in the description to download the game today, and you'll also instantly get 50,000 free silver and a free epic champion to start your journey. So good luck, have fun. Now let's get back to the video. Episode 15, Raphtalia, covering chapters 22 to 23 from the manga and chapter 2 from volume 4 of the light novel. We have Raphtalia slowly approaching the fat noble, all while Naofumi just stood back and watched. It did take a few moments, but once Raphtalia got close enough, the noble was able to recognize her as the young demi-human girl that he once tortured. He mocked her as she approached, stating how he remembers all the joy he got from bringing her pain. On the outside, these words didn't seem to affect her. I mean, she did look unnaturally calm the entire time. But her illusion sword that would usually take form with her own magic was visibly pulsating with a different type of energy this time. It was something that no one in the room had seen before, but it made it clear that there was no need to intervene. Raphtalia had a personal grudge to settle, and this would be her own fight to fight. And Naofumi knew that this was the case, and he already steeled himself to support Raphtalia every step of the way, regardless of if it was right or ethical. If Raphtalia wanted to kill this man in cold blood, then so be it. She brings herself face to face with this cruel man from her past, but unlike in the anime or the manga, where he just cowers in fear, the noble actually knew how to fight. He quickly takes out what seemed to be a cursed whip, one that would instill a curse on anything that it made contact with. It had a weird vibe to it that Philo and Naofumi were able to quickly detect. Fortunately for the anime's version of Raphtalia, the whip in this scene wasn't a cursed one, but in the novel, getting hit by it would have been highly detrimental. So as the noble swings the whip to attack, everyone in the room ducks to clear the way. Unfortunately, a soldier that was in the whip's path didn't react in time and he got struck by it. His armor immediately warped and it crushed his body on the inside. It became clear that even one lucky hit from this whip would have meant severe injury, even for Naofumi. Now, the fat man was quite skilled with the whip. He managed to wrap it around Raphtalia's sword and disarm her. Naofumi knew that Raphtalia wouldn't be able to take on the fat man barehanded, so he steps in to protect her by catching the whip with his bare hands before it could even make impact with Raphtalia. It began to burn his hands, but that meant nothing to him if it meant helping Raphtalia, and it did. It created an opening for Raphtalia to strike with her magic sword, but the fat man saw this and he dropped the whips and quickly jumped back before Raphtalia could complete the strike. Turns out, he's actually a lot more agile and powerful than you might think. Naofumi even mentions that based on what he's seen, this noble could likely fight in the waves all on his own and still come out alive. It was then that Melty mentioned how this noble had once been part of the military. He had fought in a war against the demi-humans, which explains both his distaste toward them and his noteworthy fighting abilities. Now, even with his main weapon gone, he still scoffed at Raphtalia's attempt to fight him. He truly felt that no demi-human would ever be a match for him. Raphtalia charged at him, her magic sword now glowing more than ever. Melty and Philo decided to support her with magic as well, both casting a single target wind and water spell that converged towards the fat man. He evaded Philo's spell, then somehow summoned a new whip to block Melty's with. He decided to shift his focus to Melty now, and ran over towards her to get in range to attack. Naofumi once again stepped in to stop him, giving Raphtalia a second chance to attack. She threw her magic sword like a spear, and it pierced his chest dead center, nullifying any magic that he was currently using. Then she picks up a soldier's sword from the ground and charges straight towards the Fat Man. With no time for him to react, she buries it deep into his shoulder. The Fat Man stumbles backwards until his back was against the closed window. Raphtalia, who was still succumb with rage, pushes him right through it, grabbing her magic sword and leaving the rest to fall to the ground. That was it. The Fat Man was supposedly dead and Melty and Van were now saved. The mission was over and Naofumi was now ready to leave. But Raphtalia reminded Naofumi of their promise to investigate the basement, so that's where they headed. As they approached the doors leading to the dark depths below, they were overcome by a foul stench, a similar one to that of the slave trader's tent, one of death and decay. Melty was scared, shaking at the top of the stairs. Even Philo didn't want to see what was down there. But Raphtalia insisted that they go. Naofumi wondered how many people must have died here, and as they walked down and reached the vast halls filled with cells, he was able to get a general idea from all the torture tools that he saw. It was not much longer after that when they spotted Rafana's skeleton. We know that Raphtalia was overcome with grief, but what we didn't see was that Melty was on the verge of tears as well. Knowing that these types of things was happening within her own borders sickened her. People dying to the waves was one thing, but this torture was nothing more than an evil man taking advantage of the chaos around him. Even Naofumi began to feel a bit angry. Knowing that Raphtalia's close friend had to meet such an end filled him with rage. Perhaps they could have been friends. Perhaps she could have become something more, like how Raphtalia did. But all that was just snuffed out, both to her and to countless others. There was nothing Naofumi could do to save them. The only thing that brought him the slightest comfort was that he was finally able to avenge them. After gathering Rafana's bones, they ventured deeper into the basement, eventually stumbling upon Keel. In classic anime fashion, Naofumi thinks that for a guy, this demi-human was actually kinda cute. But Keel refused to let any stranger near him. Even when Naofumi tried to give him medicine, he resisted for quite a bit before finally accepting the help. Once Keel had calmed down, they checked the rest of the basement for any survivors, then made their way back to the stairs. As they start making their way back above ground, Naofumi begins to contemplate how they were all going to get out. Philo definitely wouldn't be able to carry all 7 of them, so he was going to send Keel, Melty, and Van to escape with Philo first. Then Raphtalia and himself would stay behind. But as they begin to come up into the courtyard, they see the Fat Man in the distance, standing over the gravestone at the center, performing some weird type of ritual while the rest of his body was bleeding heavily. This was bad because Keel technically still had a slave crest marking him as the Fat Man's slave, which meant that at any moment the Fat Man could activate the curse seal and kill Keel in any number of ways. It could be through some status magic or even just a direct order. But that wasn't even the biggest of their concerns, as Van saw an even greater threat. He yelled out to the Fat Man to stop, knowing well what would happen if he completed what he was doing. It was to no avail though, and the Fat Man broke the ancient seal. A rift broke open in the sky, and from it came a massive 20-meter tall carnivorous dinosaur. That's 65 feet for you non-metric system users. And this brings us to the end of episode 15, leading us now into episode 16, Filolaial Queen, covering chapters 23 to 25 in the manga and chapters 3 to 4 from volume 4 in the light novel. Before we're shown the dinosaur though, we first get to see the new character Fitoria, and this scene was actually adapted from her own side story extra chapter, similar to that of Raphtalia's, but rather than go into that now, we'll get into her story more towards the end. So, the Fat Man had just summoned Grimlock. Well, actually it was called Tyrant Dragon Rex, but the moment it touched the ground, it obliterated literally everything within the courtyard, splitting everyone apart from each other. When Melty awoke, she was atop a pile of rubble, all alone. She couldn't see anyone or anything else. As she scanned for any sign of a familiar face, she spotted Rafana's remains scattered in the distance. She didn't want to move, but she knew how important this was to Raphtalia, so she mustered up some courage, then ran over to gather the skeleton. It was after that she called out for Naofumi and Raphtalia, but it was actually Van who found her and brought her back to the rest of them. Seeing that Melty risked her life to bring Rafana back almost brought Raphtalia to tears yet again, but they had no time for that. They needed to figure out a way to defeat this monster. It seemed to be attracted to whatever Philo had inside her, so Naofumi formulated a plan around this fact. He would take Raphtalia and Melty, hop on Philo's back, then use her to lure the monster outside the town, giving Van and the others a chance to escape. Sure enough, once they started running away, the Tyrant Rex followed closely behind. It left a grand path of destruction all along the way, but Philo did try to take a route that avoided the most civilians. They eventually were able to clear the city, and reached a point where they could fight it without the worry of causing any more casualties. Meanwhile, we see in the manga, back at the city, that Van had emerged at the ruined gate of where the demi-humans were recently rioting. He was carrying Keel, and he told the demi-humans that stood before him that they needed to go and help the people inside the city. At first, they were reluctant. I mean, these were just humans that never treated them well in the past, so why should they help them now? Many just wanted to leave, but Van knew that the townsfolk had no one else to help them. He pleaded with them, but before we find out whether they help or not, we flash back to the moments before Naofumi is about to fight the Tyrant Rex. The monster charged towards them, and as we saw in the anime, Airstrike's shield didn't do much to stop it or its subsequent attacks. Not to mention that none of their counterattacks seemed to be doing anything other than annoy it. Now, with Raphtalia at its legs and Philo at its head, it began to violently swing both its head and tail. Philo was able to get away, but with Raphtalia so close to its feet, she was in danger of being hit by its tail. Naofumi had to run and stop it in its path, but that was no easy task. It was massive, and it had such great power to it that Naofumi knew on impact that a single hit from it would mean certain death for any of the girls. This meant that the only option left was the Shield of Rage. However, before he could activate it, Melte points out the sudden occurrence of the surrounding mist. She immediately identifies it as a high-level force field, similar to the one that her mother spoke of in Legends, something that was used as a magical barrier to prevent anyone from gaining entry to the forest where the weapons of the legendary heroes were kept. And if anyone had tried to traverse this forest while the misty barrier was active, then it would just bring you back to where you started. That was the magical properties of it. It meant that even if he wanted to, Naofumi couldn't escape. He was trapped. Same with the girls and this monster. At first, he thought it was a trap set by Mine, and he was furious thinking about how they would get to watch him meet his end fighting a dinosaur of all things. But as if out of nowhere, numerous Filolaials began to emerge from the forest, and they formed a circle around them. Things were just getting weirder and weirder, and Naofumi had no clue as to what was happening. He was about to summon the Shield of Rage when he heard the voice as we saw in the anime. His shield flew back, and his arm was now struck with pain. Looking down, he saw his shield was now glowing, and on his HUD, it showed a flashing warning icon as well as a timer. The icon indicated that he could no longer switch between shields, and the timer indicated how long this restriction would be in effect for. It would seem that whoever had implemented this barrier was also capable of restricting Naofumi's use of his shield. Regardless, there was still a giant dinosaur that they had to worry about, and a sea of Filolaials wasn't really going to help with that. That's when the Filolaials began to part like the Red Sea, and from the open path in the middle came a light blue fluffy Filolaial. It was similar to that of Philo's normal form, and from the crown of its head stuck a single feather straight up. This Filolaial was pulling a carriage, and imbued in the middle of it was a gem of similar shape and size to the one in Naofumi's shield. Everything about this Filolaial screamed authority. It was the clear leader of this herd. It dropped the reins of the carriage, stepped forward, and proceeded to let out a sustained call of whatever noise a Filolaial makes. All the leaves in the trees and the bushes began to glow green, and then a powerful wind blew through the area. That's when this blue Filolaial began to grow, reaching the size of the Tyrant Dragon Rex before finally stopping. Everyone was frozen in awe except for Melte, who couldn't help but enjoy every moment of what was now happening. The Tyrant Rex charged at the new threat that was before it, but it was easily kicked away like in the anime. It stood back up and charged again, only to get knocked down once more. But before it could recover for a third time, Fitoria kicked its torso so hard that she sent it flying straight up in the air. She then proceeded to kick the monster over and over as it flew in the air, as if she was performing some type of aerial combo like how you would see in fighting games. Naofumi's built-in HUD had calculated that Fitoria hit this monster 35 times before it reached the ground again. The beast still persisted. It got back up once more and shot the pillar of flame from its mouth, an attack that not even Naofumi's best defenses could have protected him from. But it meant nothing to Fitoria. She easily blocked it, then prepped her own ability, looking very similar to Philo's own High Quick. Then, before Naofumi could even blink, Fitoria was behind the dinosaur, and she sliced it to pieces with her claws. This brought the fight to its end, and it was now time for some introductions to be made. Fitoria went first. Initially, Naofumi could see in her the slight image of a child who was trying to act like an adult. Sure, she may have been alive for a few centuries, but there was something about the way she presented herself that made Naofumi see through her leader-like act and find a more immature person on the inside. She requested that they talk back at their sanctuary, but Naofumi insisted on absorbing the parts of the dragon dino first. We see he was able to unlock a few shields, but just like the ones that he gained from the zombie dragon, the ones here also weren't accessible at his current level, so he couldn't see what abilities these particular shields gave him yet. With that done, they step into Fitoria's carriage and are teleported to what's left of the old heroes' country, the ruins of what Naofumi's predecessors once fought to protect. This was not Fitoria's real home though. She only spent half her time in this place. Her real home was someplace else, and she refused to take any person to it. Now, skipping past the big dinner scene, we get to what Fitoria wanted to discuss. We know they talk about her reason for appearing, Philo's rare growth, and then Naofumi's journey up to this point. But we're also told that Fitoria abandoned the pointless mindset that was involved with the fight between humans and demi-humans. At one point she was part of the conflict, but in the end, she just chose not to participate. They tried to abuse and take advantage of her and her brethren, so she abandoned them, both humans and demi-humans alike, choosing only to associate with her fellow Filolaials. This stirred a whole bunch of thoughts in Naofumi's head. Like, how would these new countries react now, knowing such a powerful entity existed? Would they worship her, fear her, or even try to hunt her down? Perhaps Fitoria grew so tired of the constant power struggle that existed in the world that she just decided to pretend that it didn't exist. At least that's how Naofumi thought she may have felt. The topic of the waves then gets brought up, and it's revealed that rifts open across the globe. Fitoria wanted to know why the heroes weren't protecting everyone. As we know, she had been charged with the protection of the world by the other heroes, but this was a task that she couldn't do on her own, at least not for much longer. The other heroes' cooperation was essential, but Naofumi knew that as things were now, that wouldn't even be a possibility. In the anime, Fitoria responded by saying that if that was the case, then she'd have to kill the current heroes to save the world. In the novel and the manga, she doesn't just say it so blunt like that. Instead, she says something more ominous. She says, "Well then, I suppose there's no avoiding it." All the while, there was such an intense aura surrounding her that Raphtalia couldn't help but interpret it as murderous intent. Naofumi couldn't quite pick that up, but he did feel that something was off. I mean, for her to just say that then leave just didn't sit right with him. Now, that would be the end of episode 16, but as I said earlier, Fitoria has her own side story called the Fearful Filolaial, which we're going to talk about right now. Starting from the beginning, we're shown Fitoria mid-fight during one of the waves of destruction. She was fighting these strange energy-based monsters. They weren't particularly powerful, but they didn't seem to disappear no matter how many times she kicked them. She wondered if she would have to bring out her weapon in order to defeat them for good. But finally, the waves started to grow silent and the rifts began to close. With the fight now over, Fitoria looked at the destruction that was left behind, and she wondered why none of the four heroes showed up to assist in this area. She knew that they had been summoned, but their lack of presence in any of the waves worried her. Sure, for now she could handle the monsters in her area, but she couldn't do it forever. That's when some Filolaials that she had sent to escort a certain royal family member back home returned from their journey. Fitoria asked if they were able to succeed in their mission. They said that they don't quite remember, which made Fitoria rather upset. She warned them that if they couldn't complete their missions properly, then she'd have to get rid of them, meaning that she'd kick them out of the clan. But that was essentially a death sentence anyway, since once you were out of the clan, you basically weren't even considered a Filolaial anymore. All you could expect was to meet a pretty awful death. That's what it meant to be a part of Fitoria's group. They begged for forgiveness and told her instead of what they recalled seeing, a person that looked similar to their queen. The way they described her, though, made it seem like they weren't even talking about a Filolaial. According to them, she had many arms and many heads, and water continuously flowed from her mouth like a ravenous beast. It was as if they were describing a monster. Fitoria actually thought that this thing might be scary, but the fact that it was a queen candidate that was being raised by a hero remained, so she had no choice but to investigate these claims. She set off for Melremark and decided that the best way to gain information was to talk to some domesticated Filolaials. So she goes to a nearby Filolaial farm and asks if any have seen the people that she was looking for. One elder Filolaial knew exactly who she was talking about, so they brought her up to speed on Naofumi's whole situation. As she was leaving the farm, she heard in the distance a loud roar, causing her feathers to stand on end. Her instincts told her that this was likely a dragon. She turned to spot this massive monster chasing after a man riding a pink Filolaial queen. Knowing very well who it was that she just spotted, she chased after them. This brought up a whole bunch of warm memories from her past with the previous shield hero, but when she focused on Naofumi, she didn't feel that same warmth. There was a sad and deep anger, making her realize that this man had likely already unlocked the curse series. She felt his pain and wanted to help ease it, but that sentimentality didn't last long as she remembered what the world was really like. There was no room for that type of emotion. Before revealing herself, she decided to stay hidden and watch Naofumi in this new queen candidate fight. But the more she watched, the more she realized that Philo was weak. As she now was, she was definitely not fit to inherit Fitoria's title. Eventually, she had seen enough. She cast the barrier spell Sanctuary, making the mist appear all over the battleground. As she slowly emerged from the forest, her head was filled with so many questions, but there was always this lingering thought that if her worst fears turned out to be true, then she would have no choice but to dirty her hands for the sake of the world. It was all because of that promise she made, the promise to her hero, and she was going to keep that promise no matter what. And that's that, bringing us to the end of this cut content. From this, we got to understand a bit more of Fitoria's motives. She clearly has a lengthy history with this world, and I don't think the anime portrayed that as well as they could have. So I think it was good to learn a bit more about her. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this type of anime content, then you already know what to do. So, until next time, ciao!